Hello and welcome to today's UDI Adoption Seminar, Safer Patients, Smarter Supply Chains. I'm Bethany Dean, the Media and Communications and Special Projects Manager here at AIM, and we are excited to have a fantastic lineup of incredible speakers for today's seminar. But before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. First, I would like to share a little bit about AIM North America. AIM North America is an alliance driving the cooperation, development, and standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to the IoT, AIM NA is your ultimate industry advocate. The UDI workgroup guides the seamless integration of asset intelligent technologies in regulated environments. Led by seasoned industry veterans with decades of specialized expertise, we turn complex regulatory challenges into secure, compliant, and streamlined solutions. We encourage you to get involved. If you would like to receive more information, you can simply scan the QR code listed on the screen or visit our website at aim-na.org. I would like to also quickly review our antitrust policy. It is the policy of the AIM North America to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM North America activities shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. And then just a few other housekeeping notes. All registrants are muted upon entering the webinar, but we still want you to participate. To send a question, you can select the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as possible at the very end of today's seminar after all presentations have concluded. Today's seminar is being recorded and will be available in the coming days to those that have registered and be accessible on our YouTube channel. And with that, I would like to turn it over to today's moderator, Jay Crowley, the VP Medical Devices Solutions and UDI Practice Lead at USDM Life Sciences. Jay?
Great, thank you. And thank you, Bethany. I'd also like to thank Mary Lou Bosco and AIM for hosting and organizing this seminar. And thank all of you for attending. Looking forward to a great seminar. And of course, thank you to all the presenters for taking the time today to share your thoughts and wisdom around UDI adoption. Again, as Bethany mentioned, we will be taking questions at the end. As we're going through, if you have anything that pops up, please feel free to add it to the Q&A. And we will try to get to it all at the end, hoping we have some time left. We have a lot of great presentations, and I believe we will leave some time for Q&A. All right, Bethany, if you could pop to the next slide. Here's our agenda. We have a number of different sessions here. I am going to go first and talk about what's happening globally. Then Indira is going to talk about everything that's going on with the US implementation. Dr. Chang will talk about all the great work that he's been doing at Duke. And then we will have Debbie's going to talk more about what's going on around the fundamentals and with a couple of others. And then Beth and Karen will talk about data standards and how you can better leverage that around the UDI space. So that we hope to cover all of that today. It's a lot. It's a big view of everything that's been going on in the UDI space. And again, thank you to all of our presenters for joining us here today. All right, Bethany, let's go ahead and jump into it. So, and you go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about things that are going on globally. And before I do that, I do want to make it clear that as we have embarked on this UDI journey, and we have been on it now for, well, I've been on it for about 25 years, we see a lot of different things happening. So we have, of course, a number of regulations that are in place, and I'll touch on all of those or many of those here in a couple of moments. And they bring all sorts of new UDI requirements to bear on manufacturers. There's also a number of regulatory use cases that come from those, and I'll touch on some of those as well. But at the same time, we have other UDI or UDI-like requirements that occasionally pop up. So we see, for example, in the US, in some cost and contracting activities or with our GPOs, we see some requirements for UDI in what I'll call the commercial space. So we have some commercial use cases. We see that, for example, also in things like the Dutch implant registry, where as a requirement to have to sell your implants in the Netherlands, you need to participate in this Dutch implant registry and provide a certain amount of data. Again, this is more of a commercial requirement than a regulatory requirement. We also see what I call some quasi-regulatory use cases. So we tend to think about regulators in an often somewhat narrow sense in terms of, say, in the US FDA or in the EU, the European Commission, or the competent authorities. But there are other people who are involved in various activities, and whether that's the importation of medical devices or the payment of medical devices, they may not be regulators in the way that we typically think about them, but they have a sort of quasi-regulatory requirements that often come into play. And I know that Indira will touch a little bit on this as well from a US perspective. So just keep in mind as we continue on this journey that we have not just regulatory use cases, but others that want to have UDI or leverage UDI and the data associated with it for various use cases. Next slide, please. So how are we doing? So when we started this journey, again, 20 some odd years ago, the goal was, the mandate from industry was that we create this globally harmonized approach to UDI. And there have been a number of activities that have gone on, the most important of which is a guidance, actually a number of guidances from what is now the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, or IMDRF, that describe or outline what a UDI system should look like for a regulator when they implement it. And I would say that in general, as regulators have come along and created UDI systems, that we have generally followed the requirements or the outline that is in the guidance documents. So we see, for example, the use of global issuing agencies, GS1, HIBIC, ICC-BPA, for example. We see this focus, continued focus on two parts to the UDI, the device identifier and the production identifier. We see generally the same kind of language used in terms of application. We apply it to the label, to higher levels of packaging. We have this concept of direct marking where we put the UDI on the device itself for many reusable devices. And in general, regulators have taken a technology neutral approach. So we don't dictate what kind of technology needs to be used. Any AIDC will work. Having said that, there is, I would say, and Beth, I don't know if you'll touch on this, but there has been, I would say, a pivot to 2D barcodes, particularly around the GS1 data matrix. So even though from a regulatory perspective, we remain in a technology neutral space generally, we are seeing sort of organically a pivot to 2D barcodes. So from that perspective, I'd say that regulators are globally are following this general approach. There are some differences, and I'll touch on those in a moment in some narrow sense. Where we do see differences, though, is in the regulators' databases. So if you're familiar with the acronym soup of UDI databases, in the US we have the GUDID, Europe we have EUDAMED, for example. In Australia we have AUDIT, or however you want to pronounce that. And we have the same thing in Saudi Arabia and China and Taiwan. Everyone has their own database. So we necessarily see, well, maybe not necessarily, but we do see differences in the database, both in terms of the amount of data, the type of data, definitions for the data. And I know this is an issue that we've continued to talk about over the years, and IMDRF is coming back to it. But we do have these differences, and I think that by definition creates some friction, both for manufacturers and for others. And so it limits on some level our ability to share data. We may not have the same product. We may be creating country-specific labeling, which is something that we hoped to avoid in the early days. But the way that some of this is played out, we tend to see that. And we've seen a lot of this, particularly in Europe, as manufacturers have pivoted to the new regulations. We're seeing European-specific product, maybe rest of the world product. So hopefully we can come back to that, but just know that is happening. From a broader implementation perspective, I would say, from my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear what the other panelists have to say, we're still not aligned internally and externally. We see manufacturers, for example, rely on other internal identification numbers or systems, and only when they are actually commercializing a product, sending it to someone, that they talk about the UDI of the product. So there is this disconnect, if you will, between the UDI and the internal identification for the product. And we see the same kind of thing play out, whether it's a distributor or a provider or payer. We have these different ways of identifying products. We haven't really all come to the point where we're using UDI organically throughout the whole life cycle of the product, which was the goal, and maybe still is the goal. But I'll let the other panelists touch on that as well. There are some regulatory issues that we still are trying to tackle. Software has become, I'd say, a bigger issue, of course, than it was when we started this 20 some odd years ago. We have not only a lot of software which is independent, so software is a medical device, but we have a tremendous amount of software that's in a medical device, or SIMD. And how do we think about that, and how do we manage that over the life cycle of that product is an issue that we're still struggling with, as well as some of the more complex medical devices, right? Devices tend to have long lives and can evolve quite a bit over time, and I'm not sure that we've done a very good job in understanding or having a consistent way of thinking about those and applying UDIs to those over the life cycle. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of a short cheat sheet of where we are globally. We have a number of countries that are what I would say more or less done. US, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, South Korea, and Colombia all have UDI systems in place, and the implementation timelines have passed. There's still work that's being done, and India, for example, we'll talk about all the work still going on in the US. But those 5 essentially are done, and if you're selling in that country, then or that region, then hopefully your products are UDI compliant. I will say that as we look at some of these countries, many of them do not have particularly extensive UDI requirements. There is this, if you will, expectation that your product is UDI compliant for the US or Europe or whatever sort of primary country you're thinking about, and that when you get to Taiwan, for example, or South Korea, you don't see a lot of very specific UDI requirements. There's an expectation, again, that it's there. They'll have a database and a requirement to submit the data, but not a lot of requirements in terms of how UDI is applied to the individual devices. Number of countries that are in play, and I'm going to talk about each of those, Europe and the sort of highly related Switzerland implementation. Australia, China, Singapore, Brazil, and UK has recently popped up with their draft regulations that I'll touch on. There's a number of countries here that are in various phases of discussing UDI or thinking about UDI. So just know that if you sell in these countries, that they may have UDI or UDI-like requirements sometime in the near future. Next slide, please. So talk very briefly about the European regulation. So if you're selling in Europe, hopefully you're well aware that we have 2 new regulations, the medical device regulation and future diagnostic medical device regulation. Their requirements are essentially a cut and paste of the IMDRF guidance with some differences. So they tend to look very much like the guidance document that we wrote many years ago. There are a few differences, generally speaking, in the way that you apply UDI to the device. They aren't huge, but they're listed here, and I won't go through those. We'll make the slides available. But if you have any questions about those, feel free to reach out to me. The biggest difference, and the thing that we spend the most time talking about, is EUDAMED, the European Database of Medical Devices. It is very different than GUDID on many different levels. They introduced something called the basic UDI-DI, which is a family level identifier. They introduced something called a master UDI-DI, which is for what they call highly individualized devices, so contact lenses and spectacle frames and the such. So we've introduced a number of levels of complexity, and I would say really pretty intense complexity, when you think about the data and the data models associated with those. There's a number of quite a number of different and additional data attributes for UDAMED. Definitions tend to be different. The change rules are different, and instead of GMDN, they use something called the European Medical Device Nomenclature, which looks nothing like GMDN. So we have a whole another way of creating classification for products in Europe. Next slide, please. And this is one of a number of slides that the commission put together that just looks at the different data attributes and where they sit in the structure. So I talked about the family, the basic UDI-DI as an identifier, and a number of data attributes associated with it, which are additional to the ones that we typically think about for UDI. In the middle looks more like, if you're familiar with GUDID, we have certain data attributes associated to that device itself, if you will, the primary DI. And then we have package DIs that go along with it. You can see by the little color coding and asterisks and double asterisks that are there that a lot of the data attributes are both required and cannot change. So it's a very rigid database, or a very rigid module of a database. So it requires a lot of thought before you actually go and get the data in there. Next slide, please. We are actually about to start our UDAMED journey. Tomorrow is the first day that the device registration and UDI module becomes mandatory. This has been a journey 6 years in the making. That was originally, UDAMED was supposed to be available at the date of application of the regulations, which was in 2020. So we are now 6 years delayed in the implementation. So it creates all sorts of issues with timing, and I won't go into all of those, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But this is a short little decision tree that we put together to help people understand when registration of your product is required, if it's required at all. So if you have any questions about that, we are in this implementation time. So again, starts tomorrow and ends essentially in November. And after that, any new product will need to be in it. This applies to products that have been or will be on the market already. Next slide, please. I just want to touch on this, and I know, Indira, you're going to talk about some of the alignment issues from a US perspective. What's interesting, I think, when you look at UDAMED is this forced data alignment, because it's one database with a number of modules. Everything is tied together. So if, for example, you're going to submit an incident report, you tie it directly to data that has already been submitted into the database. So a UDI that's already in the UDI module. So it really requires, I'd say, a lot more thought in terms of assurance that you have all the data aligned, that as you move through all of these various activities, that not only does the data make sense in and of itself, but that it is able to be tied to the other modules and the other activities in those other modules, since it's all forced to data alignment. Next slide, please. Switzerland, as you might know, it did not sign their mutual recognition agreement, and still have not. So they are on their own. It essentially follows the regulations, but they cannot participate in UDAMED. So they have their own database that looks very much like UDAMED, but has its own mechanisms for uploading. We're also in or about to begin the implementation timeline for products that are distributed in Switzerland. So starting July 1 and ending the end of this calendar year, if you're distributing products in Switzerland, then you need to have all of your data for those products. And it's basically all the UDAMED data in SwissDMED as well. Next slide, please. Australia has also come out with their regulations. They have been very thoughtful. They have been working on these for a number of years. They look very much like, I would say, the US requirements with a few EU pieces thrown in. So it's an interesting mix of requirements, but in general, if you're selling products in the EU or US, then your products will will also be UDI compliant for Australia as well. A few different changes in there, but essentially the same. Next slide, please. The biggest difference I would say is that there's this concept of the sponsor, the person who is responsible for that product in Australia, and the sponsor is the one who ultimately has to assure that the data in the database is correct. So there's essentially a two-step process. If you're going to submit the data, if the manufacturer is going to submit the data, then the sponsor needs to actually clear the data so that it can become public. Couple other data attributes that we don't see in the US, though generally the data set looks very much like that for GUDID. Next slide, please. The next two slides talk about the timeline, the implementation timelines. There are two sets, one for devices that are compliant to the European requirements and all others. So if you are not supplying MDR or IVDR compliant products, this is your timeline for products that you are putting on the Australian market. And if you go to the next slide, these are the timelines for those products that are transitioning to the MDR and IVDR. So you don't have to make your directive compliant products or legacy products. You don't need to submit those, make those UDI compliant for Australia, but as you do make your products regulation compliant, then you need to also submit the data to the Australian UDI database. Next slide, please. China has been, as you can see in the timeline there, we've been working on China for a number of years. Essentially, there are a few requirements, not very onerous, and then there's a database and set of data that needs to be submitted. And you can see there in the bottom two bullets that we're working through the last two implementation timelines. But most manufacturers have been working on the China requirements for a number of years. Next slide. Same is true in Singapore, where we've been working on this for a number of years, but you can see that we're working up to the last two implementation timelines. They have a very small set of data that needs to be submitted. You can see in that last bullet in the top, it's only a handful of data attributes that need to be submitted in addition to the registration requirements and in addition to the products being UDI compliant. Next slide, please. Brazil, after some time, has recently published March of this year, the last piece of the puzzle. So they had a implementation timeline for applying UDI to the product, and they needed to complete the database, and then they published the set of requirements you can see in the bottom for the UDI to be submitted to their database. So there's two sets of requirements with two very different timelines. The top one, again, is for UDI application, and the bottom is for the data to be submitted to the database, which is, again, even now 3 years in the future. Next slide, please. And my last slide. So for those of you who've been on this journey for a while, you know that the UK has kind of come and gone. We had some NHS requirements a number of years ago, commercial requirements to submit UDI, to have UDI compliant products and submit data. Now, with the new medical device regulations that were published just recently, 11 May of this year, they're talking about a new set of requirements. It looks very much like, as you might expect, looks very much like the MDR and IVDR requirements, essentially a cut and paste of those. What we don't know, we don't have any visibility into, is what their database will look like. They have a registration database now, not a UDI database. Whether they'll repurpose those or repurpose the registration database or come up with a whole new EUDAMED-like database, we'll have to see. You can see there that they're fast tracking these regulations. There will be multiple transition periods, of course, but just something to keep an eye on. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. So if you go to the next slide, Bethany, I will introduce Indira Kandori, a friend of mine now for, I don't know, 20 some odd years, and now leading the UDI program at FDA. Indira, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I hope everybody can hear me. Please let me know. Awesome. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jay and AIM, for including me as part of this illustrious panel. I'm really appreciated the worldwide tour that Jay gave us on the UDI requirements. It's definitely quite a complicated picture to track for those of you who are having to comply with all of those requirements. My job today is fairly simple. I'm here to give a very quick update on the FDA UDI program and share some key areas, that we want to highlight. Next slide, please. So we started out with, the key UDI program objectives, which is really to have a system to adequately identify devices from manufacturing through distribution all the way to patient use. And there are many benefits to UDI program, and some of the key ones that I've highlighted here are the ones that I want to talk about this morning, which is really to facilitate rapid and accurate identification of devices, allow for better reporting and review of adverse events, more efficient management of medical device recalls, and also enable the FDA to utilize document device use so that we can utilize real-world data sources for device performance evaluation. Next slide, please. So as to the first objective, right, to identify a device accurately and quickly, the UDI rule was published 13 years ago, and the key requirements are have UDI on the label and device identification information in the global unique device identification database. So we definitely are there from the fundamental building blocks, if you will, for the UDI system are properly in place now. All of the devices that are commercially being distributed in the United States now are expected to have a UDI as long as the UDI requirements apply to those devices. And we have more than 5.1 million records in the GUDID database, and all of this is available globally for users. And we see that the data is being accessed globally throughout the world. Next slide, please. I'm happy to share this slide. I think in my prior, if you have seen me present this, you've seen me showing 80% of, approximately 80% of medical device adverse event reports being submitted to the FDA are now being populated with UDI. What I have today is to show you that about more than 70% of those devices actually have a valid UDI. That means this is data that we can actually utilize to really meet one of the objectives of the UDI system, which is to really be able to use UDI to aggregate adverse events, so we are able to detect those safety signals and utilize it for device safety evaluation. So really happy to see, this trend of usable data that is coming to us as adverse events, and to all of those manufacturers reporting this, we really thank you for that, and please continue to do so. Next slide. Same story with recalls. We're continuing to see consistently more than 70% of recall submissions coming to the FDA are being populated with UDI. We are seeing some data issues here, and we're working to address those, discrepancies in the data quality of what we're seeing in recalls compared to the data that we have internally in our systems, which I'll speak to a little later. But overall, the trend is a consistent submission of UDIs as part of the recalls, which we sincerely appreciate. Next slide, please. Moving now to the other key goal for the UDI system, which is really UDI adoption and utilization throughout the healthcare ecosystem. While the FDA does not have a direct authority to mandate this area, we have been consistently working across the federal system to work with our partners, such as the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT. They are responsible to really establish interoperability standards, interoperability of health information exchange. And to that end, back in 2015, we got UDI added as part of the United States core data for interoperability. This is really a standard set of data elements that are important for health information exchange. So once a data element is included as part of the USCDI electronic health record systems, if they want to become certified electronic health record systems, are required to have the ability to store this information, capture this information, store this information, and make sure they're available for exchange across systems. And by having UDI included in 2015, it was limited to implantable devices. We've been working with ONC, and I'm happy to report last year in July, USCDI version 6 now has expanded scope of UDI inclusion and includes UDI for all devices subject to UDI rule requirements. So this is another important step in terms of UDI utilization, a fundamental step where UDI is part of the health information core data set. So we're excited about this, and we do feel that this is going to, spur adoption. It's the fundamental building block that is in place for adoption. Next slide. The next big thing that I wanted to take a moment to talk about is the proposed rule that was published by the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services. This was published last month on April 14th, and you could search for this proposed rule, and I have a hyperlink in the slide. So essentially, this is incentivizing the capture of UDI during patient care. So what this is doing is CMS is proposing to utilize UDI as part of their quality measure program under interoperability. So hospitals and healthcare systems will be asked to respond to to attest to UDI capture. Are they capturing UDI for an implantable medical device that is used for patient care? And if they have to respond yes or no, and if they respond, whether it's yes or no, they get points towards meeting their quality measure goals. And if they meet their quality measure goals, their payment will be increased. If they do not respond to this question, a lack of response will result in a downward payment adjustment. So this is an incredible first step in actually incentivizing UDI capture at the point of patient care. So we're super excited about this. There are some questions that are included in the proposed rule and an opportunity for everyone to review and comment, which will really guide. And, we'd really want to hear stakeholder thoughts on, this measure and how to really move forward in future years along with this measure. So really look forward to seeing what the comments are, and we encourage all of you to go in and please take a look and put forward your comments. Next slide. Another area that we continue to work with CMS on is the UDI inclusion in claims. CMS back in 2024 planned to issue a proposed rule by December 2024, which they put out as their intent. However, this has been delayed, but we are continuing to advocate for this to move forward. So stay tuned for that, and see what later this year may bring about here. Next slide. So these are some areas that we're watching. So what are we doing here in the FDA to prepare for some of these, UDI adoption initiatives that are coming across from our federal partner agencies, right? One key area, as we mentioned, 13 years into the rule, we really want to make sure that the compliance, the UDI rule requirements are implemented correctly. This means properly formed UDI on device labels and packages that can be utilized by healthcare systems and providers. Completeness and the quality of data submission in GUDID is there so that all these different healthcare systems and electronic health records, when they are looking up data in GUDID, the data is reliable and usable. And I also talked about that the quality of UDI that is being submitted to FDA in post-market submissions is adequate, and then it is usable. So along those lines, we are focused on compliance And UDI is now included as part of all routine inspections. And for those of you who are following the compliance space closely, you know that the FDA rolled out the Quality Management System regulation as of February 2nd, 2026. And along the QMSR, essentially what it does is incorporates the ISO 13485 standards by reference. The focus is slightly different with QMSR than what it has been to date when it comes to inspections. It's more focused on risk management and total product lifecycle approach. So definitely make sure you are looking at your UDI requirements and you're able to respond to any questions on compliance. We have issued to date 24 warning letters and 14 untitled letters for UDI violations. And we put, of course, inspections will continue. UDI is also part of imports label screening, and there is an import alert. And once a company is placed on import alert, then of course their products can be detained at the port of entry until they are compliant with UDI rule requirements. Currently, we have 6 companies that are placed on import alert, and this is of course continuing across all ports of entry which receive medical devices. Next slide. So I also want to take a moment to talk about GUDID data quality, which is going to be a huge focus for us. And the intent here really is to make sure we have fit-for-use UDI data, both for internal utilization and for external users, some of the ones such as the claim space and also the quality measures that I just talked about. We intend to communicate data expectations to labelers, and there is a regulatory requirement to maintain and update GUDID data that I have on the slide here. Next slide. And our intent really is to make sure that the authorized device that you get approval for from the FDA and the data that you, as a result, put into GUDID on what you're marketing should really serve as a device master data. And we are looking to make sure the identification information GUDID matches all the post-market data that you submit to us, whether it's through annual reports, post-market studies, MDRs, recalls, or the safety communication informations that we put out and that you put out, all should really match the master data that is in GUDID when it comes to identification. Next slide. And really the data expectation for us is TPLC data alignment, right? So you get a device approved, you register and list that device, and you tell us this is the device that we're selling as a result of that approval. And then finally, when the post-market data comes, it really should match the data that you put into GUDID. So that's what we're looking at. And some of you, if you're manufacturers, some labelers out there may have received communications from us asking you to explain data discrepancies between our internal systems and the data in GUDID. And we plan to continue to do this. This is going to be an ongoing effort. Specifically, we are looking to launch a more focused effort around implantable devices just to get ready for some of those, for the proposed rule that came out and also any future updates that may come about. So we're going to focus on implantable devices, and you will be hearing from us on any data discrepancies. And we're always there, of course, to assist you to make the updates into GUDID. And I think those are some key areas that we're looking at. And I think I'm done. Next slide, please. Yep, there you go. Turning back over to Jay.
Oops. Let's see if I can get my video to come on. Great. Thank you, Indira. That was fantastic. Appreciate you continuing to push the rock up the hill or herd the cats up the hill or however you want to think about it. So it's a great work, and I appreciate that. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Jimmy Chang, who has been on this journey with us since the beginning, I would say, and has been just a fantastic proponent and advocate and just doing fantastic work. So I appreciate you being here and look forward to your presentation. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Thank you very much, Jay. It is an honor to be here. I'm going to pivot a bit from the discussions that Jay and Indira have presented to you and provide you a little bit of perspective about where we are from a healthcare enterprise standpoint. specifically about building clinically integrated supply chains using the UDI as the source of truth. Next slide, please. So if you think about the opportunity to unleash the potential of UDI, one of the key requirements is that the UDI is actually incorporated into the workflows and the data flows within a healthcare enterprise. This concept of the clinically integrated supply chain, which I will define for you in a couple of slides a little bit more deeply, really reflects the need for the UDI to serve as a single source of truth across all of the systems and processes, workflows, data flows within a healthcare enterprise. I'm happy to report that we've been able to accomplish the clinically integrated supply chain within the cardiology domain at Duke University, and I will also describe to you a bit about how we did that to give you an idea of both where healthcare writ large stands and what at a healthcare enterprise level is going to be required to actually implement. Like I like to say, while UDI implementation is not magic, it does not happen magically. It actually does not occur without a fair amount of effort. There are no miracles here. This is really work that has to be done in order to incorporate it into the healthcare enterprise environment. Next slide. In the words of the inimitable Yogi Berra, he said, if you don't know where you're going, chances are you will end up somewhere else. So what I would like to impose upon you is the first point, the next slide please, is that I believe that where we need to end up is this clinically integrated supply chain. HIMSS has created a outcomes maturity model, and in yellow I have highlighted where most healthcare enterprises are today regarding the use of the digital information. And that is at the level really of inventory management, resupply, managing supply costs, et cetera, et cetera. If you read through the supply chain outcomes maturity model, you realize that in order to get progressively advanced across these stages, UDI actually has to be integrated into the flow of data, the flow of the, if you will, the data that serves the analytics for any of the stages. What we set out to do was to go from stage 2, which is where we were 5 years ago, 6 years ago, all the way to stage 6 in one fell swoop, and that's what I'm going to try to describe to you. And I'm happy to report that we actually have elements of stage 7, and that is precision and personalized healthcare with predictive analytics implemented at the point of care in our models and in some of our production systems. Next slide. So what does that really mean, using UDI as the single source of truth to accomplish a clinically integrated supply chain? That means that every system that could potentially interact, every process that could potentially interact in the delivery of healthcare needs to be involved. Yes, we start off with the labeling from the manufacturers, the distributors and our GPOs that provide us products. We hope, we anticipate that the use of the UDI is incorporated into their processes. But between the lines are the systems that are embedded within a healthcare enterprise that also need to coordinate across the UDI as a single source of truth. So that includes item master, supply chain management, inventory management, clinical documentation, electronic health records, billing and coding, and data warehousing, so that we can then provide the information that allows for regulatory and device surveillance. Next slide. If you break this down into the systems then that sit between those two lines, what systems are those? So you have ERP, you have inventory management, which oftentimes is a different system than, if you will, the supply chain system. Clinical documentation. Clinical documentation systems can be built into an electronic health record system, but aren't always. Sometimes they are independent. They are designed specifically for the requirements of a given procedure type, the unique characteristics of a specific domain, et cetera. So we do have clinical documentation systems, oftentimes that are not EHRs, that are standalone systems for specific indication-specific uses. Electronic health record then becomes the document repository, and Dira has already mentioned this. This is the place where CMS has really focus the proposed rule, but I do want to remind you that potential systems that could be used for UDI capture are not just the electronic health record. They, in many places, in most organizations, include inventory management, and in, again, some institutions required documentation via the clinical documentation systems is where you could have the barcode scan appear. And then if you want to really use this data from an analytics standpoint, you need to do this at a enterprise data warehouse level, not necessarily at, if you, for example, at an EHR level. Next slide. So let me provide you kind of the pathway we took to accomplish our clinically integrated supply chain. Next slide. I'm a cardiologist. I'm an interventional cardiologist, so I'm kind of native to the cardiac cath lab. But it turns out the cath lab, and I would say similar laboratories like interventional radiology, electrophysiology, the endoscopy suites, et cetera, they really are the optimal test environment because they typically have a high volume of cases. The products are UDI marked, and most institutions, I would say the vast majority of US institutions in particular, are already at stage 2 or perhaps a little bit more with the use of electronic data for managing supplies, the item master, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. So where do you need to go? Well, what we decided was what we wanted to do was implement across all of the systems, from supply chain to inventory management, procedure documentation, EHR, et cetera, the ones I listed before, using the UDI via exchange of that UDI information as the single source of truth. Now, how do you go about doing this? This is a typical project management Gantt chart. The 4 phases that we identified was, number 1, making sure that the C-suite was on board with the overall high-level goals, plus some financials as to how much it was going to cost, what resources were going to need to be used. Number 2, planning, writing it down on paper, if you will, creating the blueprint for what it needed to be done. Number 3, a technical build. This is where most of our hours were spent. It's the building of the interfaces to move the data back and forth. It's the testing and retesting of that. And then finally, deployment, big bang. So just to take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. Next slide. First of all, why do you want to have the clinically integrated supply chain using a UDI as a single source of truth? What are the reasons a healthcare enterprise would actually want it? And what we provided to our C-suite was an argument that it really was about the value of doing this from end to end. That is, there's a financial value, there's a clinician value, there's elimination of data errors, and there's operational efficiencies that can be accomplished. Next slide. Jumping forward to the end, what about going live? What about, if you will, the big bang? Well, it turns out that our staff already understood the paradigm. When you go to the grocery store and scan your can of corn at a barcode scanner, you already know what is going to be required. So the big bang component was not that big of a deal, if you will. Next slide. What was the time occupying part of this was trying to figure out across all of the systems, and you can see the systems I have here represented, what systems needed the data and in what format and in what structure where we're going to be transmitting this data back and forth. And without belaboring the point, suffice it to say, this actually took several hundred hours to work through. And my hope is that through, and as again, Indira mentioned, through, for example, the FHIR USDI standards, we could actually get closer and closer to plug and play so that we go from literally hundreds of hours to perhaps dozens of hours to get this working at any individual institution. Next slide. So how did we do and what did UDI enable? Well, I would actually love to say that the UDI exceeded our expectations. What we were able to accomplish, and again, the vision was to do it end to end, was that we, number 1, created standardized device description and clinical documentation. We did not have to have these cheat sheets that we were giving to our physicians to do their documentation any longer, because we automatically use the UDI to index the products that were used in a procedure and then put into their clinical documentation based upon the UDI exactly what was used. We accomplished very tight inventory management. including attribution of the use of those devices. You can, again, take a look at these items here on the list, but suffice it to say, everything that we thought we were going to be able to accomplish, we did accomplish, and then with a fair amount of robustness. Last slide then is a just summary of our results. We were quite successful with our go live. There were no glitches. We basically just turned it on and it worked. We've completely eliminated manual clinical inventory management documentation. We've reduced errors. We're saving time. We automatically push our implant device data into the EHR device implant table. We've improved fairly dramatically our supply chain processes. We have enabled UDI device recalls via a query. So now it takes us less than 5 minutes to identify anybody who has received a product, provided again that we have the UDI, and it does save money. So hopefully I've given you a glimpse of what we're doing on the healthcare side. Still a lot of work to do, and it actually is very complex. But with that, let me return the discussion back to Jay.
Jimmy, thank you very much. That is fantastic. I know that you have been working on this a long time, but it's so fantastic to see, and happy to hear that UDI exceeded your expectations. Woo! Right? Oh, progress. So great. Thank you very much, Jimmy. We just need to clone you and put you into the other 5,000 hospitals that are out there. All right. So next slide, please. And I'm going happy to turn this over to Debbie Greenway, who is going to run this small little panel here. There is no Dennis Black. Dennis has retired, for those of you who know him. He has retired, and so off into vacation mode here. So, but two others, Lana Mechanic and my good friend Tania Pearson, who will work on this panel. So turn this over to you, Debbie.
All right, thank you, Jay. And thank you, Tania and Lana, for being here with me to share some real world hurdles, as well as some solutions about how you overcome those things and some advice for the team. So yeah, let's get started. So we've heard a lot about UDI. In addition to meeting regulatory guidelines, maybe Tania, can you tell us a little about how your organization is using UDI compliance to improve supply chain efficiency and patient safety and other things like that?
Yeah, so again, definitely from an inventory and supply chain management, we've been doing this. So again, even before the UDI rules kind of were really official, we had already started putting the barcodes on our products so that we could be able to control and be able to manage our inventory. Again, I work for Medtronic, so we're a global company. So being able to manage our inventory worldwide is really, really critical for our success.
Great, thanks. I bet that's a lot of inventory coming from. So Lana, can you help us with your information about database on FDA inspections and warning letters and GUDID submissions? What would you say are the top 3 UDI non-compliance issues that you currently see manufacturers struggling with?
Thanks, Debbie, and good morning, everybody. Actually, if we could go to the next slide, we do have some information about this. So, and just quickly for those of you on the call, my organization actually assists healthcare providers with UDI compliance as part of our inventory management solutions. Along the very similar lines that Jimmy was just talking about to achieve the clinically integrated supply chain. So in the course of our work, we do see issues around various non-compliance, if you will, with UDI that are directly impacting the ability for the healthcare providers and the end users utilizing barcodes and capturing the product packages for both point of care and supply chain transactions, having issues with being able to accomplish those tasks if and when they encounter these various issues of non-compliance. So I've outlined here a few of the examples that we've seen in the industry. And we can kind of quickly go through them. And of course, you can peruse it at your convenience later on. But one of the top ones we see is improperly encoded barcodes. And if we go to the next slide, you can see a few examples of that. There's a variety. There's just a few that we sort of pulled from our experience, what we're seeing. There's a variety of issues like that between the primary and secondary sort of identifiers on the product packaging. So the issues, that's sort of one of those fundamentals that would be great for everyone to solve. Right? At this point, the standards are pretty clear, and the ability to comply with what is actually encoded in the barcodes on the packages certainly should be compliant so that the end users are actually able to utilize this information, right? If we go to the next slide, we could see other issues around sort of that may cause problems for the end users in the healthcare setting are various other application identifiers that may not be parsable by the various either clinical or supply chain systems that may need to capture this information. This is not necessarily technically incorrect, but it is something to keep in mind for those of you seeking proper compliance and utilization of this of these barcodes for healthcare providers. Next slide. Again, from a clinician point of view, we're looking at it from that perspective. When you're talking about lots of different types of barcodes on product packaging, you could see how it could be confusing for the frontline staff. Some of the information may refer to IFUs, for instance, as opposed to actual UDI on the packaging. So again, various examples of how that could be a problem as well for the end users as you're thinking about the impact of the labeling on its utilization at the point of care or anywhere else throughout the supply chain. All right, next slide. Again, things around so not only the product labeling, but compliance with GUDID submissions as well. So we do see examples of the information missing from Access GUDID. And as Indira was talking about, that is the source of truth for this information in order for the UDI truly to be fully utilized for the purposes of patient safety, et cetera. All right. Next slide. We also see situations where the product packaging is not matching what's been submitted into GUDID, right? That's another factor, as you can imagine, that would prevent full utilization of UDI. So we definitely want to make sure this is not something that is that should exist. Next slide. And then one other issue we see as well commonly is multiple DIs for the same item in GUDID as well. These are again some of the examples that could also create issues, of course, for the healthcare providers as they're trying to utilize UDI information in their health records, and to Jimmy's very eloquently put presentation around how that data feeds into the ultimate analytics. This obviously could be a major problem, both from the capturing this information in the first place, and then obviously being able to capture it again, 3 months later, 6 months later, et cetera, and then not being able to do so because things have changed inadvertently, right? So those are the things, Debbie, to answer your initial questions, that we see the examples of noncompliance either on the labeling side of the actual packaging or in terms of its GUDID submissions or GUDID information, either it's missing or there's multiple DIs issues. So we see that still on the market. It's not the majority of the cases, but it's still happening enough to where it can slow down clinical processes and documentation processes and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Debbie, I want to make sure, can I add on
Yes,
to
please.
this conversation? So again, I definitely, I see Medtronic is definitely has been a culprit regarding the multiple DIs under the same SKU, but want to make sure that the audience understands that sometimes when the G10 changes, there could be a multiple reasons. So it could be from a global perspective. So again, with all the new UDI requirements that are coming up, there are triggers that require us to change the G10. And if we're going to change that G10, it is going to impact where we send that globally. So at least for Medtronic, again, if there's something that there's a trigger for Europe, then we're going to change the G10, but we're still going to distribute that G10, within the US, which then means we are required to put that into the GUDID. So that could be some changes. And again, there is a work group under IMBRF that's going to be looking at that and advocacy to try and harmonize it a little bit more so that regulators, as they bring on new UDI regulations, that they don't add to the triggers because it will impact how we do this globally. And again, with Medtronic, not an excuse, but as I mentioned, we've been putting barcodes on products for many, many years. And basically, to be able to control our inventory, we were changing the G10. G10 is how we were controlling distribution. So even though nothing was changing with the product, in order for us to control that product, that's how we were changing the G10. Again, we have found another way of how to control it internally. So hopefully, we won't see as many popping up in the GUDID. But again, because of the triggers from a global perspective, that still keeps adding on. Can you go back a slide? I know there was things regarding the data not found in GUDID. I want to make sure that everyone understands that what's required to go into the GUDID are going to be products that we are placing on the U.S. market. So if we have a product that is only in a specific market, even though you put the G10 into the GUDID, that could be a reason why that is not showing up.
Yeah,
I think as we mentioned,
quantitative.
yeah, one of some of the reasons. So again, sometimes make sure that we understand the requirements as far as what goes in GUDID. Everything that's showing up in one global database like GUDID may not necessarily show up in the Australia database, depending on what the intended market is for those products, for depending on from the manufacturer. And I think another thing, I think Indira mentioned this as well, is it is data quality, and I think we're seeing that across the board, especially as we get different definitions from different regulators. But again, that's going to be the one thing that I would urge manufacturers, whether you're small or large. And I know for some of the smaller companies, it might be a little bit more challenging if you don't have internal systems that can help trigger as far as when you need to make an update. But I would say, I think the question was kind of what's the non-compliance. Is going to be probably just making sure that you are taking a look at your data, making sure that you're updating it. This also includes the commercial end date. Sometimes when you're no longer going to be placed on the market, make sure that you go ahead and populate that in the GUDID.
Mm-hmm. Well, while we're on the GUDID, what if a hospital or a distributor gets a device that is not located in the GUDID, what steps should they take, and what risks are they at to get to go and get the right information for this?
Well, normally what I've experienced is that they normally will reach out to the FDA and kind of put a flag saying, hey, we don't see this product or this G10 in the GUDID, and then the FDA normally would reach out to the labeler to identify why this is missing, and then they would normally give a response and get it in there. But at least for a Medtronic perspective, we don't place anything on the U.S. market until we know that it's in GUDID. So hopefully we are staying compliant. That's how one of the ways that we're staying compliant is we have it embedded in our internal process as far as when we release product in the U.S., making sure that it's in GUDID first.
Okay.
Right. And we just want to make sure that happens with every manufacturer, right? Because we do unfortunately see situations where that is not the case.
Yes.
So.
Okay, so back to the G10, there is some gray area there about, do you issue a new number when the packaging changes, or maybe the sterilization process changes, or things like that. How does your organization, Tania, decide when to get a new G10?
So we rely on the triggers. So again, the first one, and I'm sure Beth is probably going to speak on this a little bit. So GS1 is our issuing entity. So each issuing entity have their rules as far as when you need to change the G10. And I know that we recently have been looking at the GS1 allocation rules as far as saying when you have to change the G10. So again, if you're changing packaging configuration, if you're going from a 10 pack to a 5 pack, you're going to have to change that G10 on the higher packaging, but the each level G10 could potentially remain the same. What was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
No, I think you answered it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so again, I mean, I want to start. That's going to be for the issuing entity. But as we get new regulations from the different regions, they also have what we consider to be G10 triggers. So anytime we make, from a Medtronic perspective, if we make a change to a product, we take a look to say, hey, does GS1 require us to make a new G10 change? And then we go through every country that we're selling that product in. Are there rules within that regulation that require us to change that G10? If not, we find a way to manage that, internally. And then if we change that G10 and then make sure that we get those registered in all the countries that we place that product on the market.
Okay, good. Thank you. So maybe can you describe some of the common issues that come up when identifying which products need direct marketing and which ones do not? And specifically, what should manufacturers do when they have a product that's been separated from the packaging that hasn't required direct marking?
Yeah, so again, the direct marketing rules have really come out from the regulator. So I would say that Europe has more of a strict regulation as far as saying reusable devices. So it would be my recommendation to take, the more stringent approach, even though the US may not require it, but the EU does. If you're going to sell it both, it's going to be in your best interest to go ahead and direct mark that product. So we kind of go off of the regulation regarding direct marketing. But again, if it's not technically feasible or it's going to cause, the device to not function properly, then we have to do an exemption in those cases.
Yeah. Okay. And can you guys help advise healthcare providers about what their resources are and where they should go to get the best, most reliable information when they see inconsistencies in this labeling?
Inconsistent labeling, you were saying, from like once they receive.
When they encounter some of these issues that Lana has shown us.
I would reach out directly to the manufacturer. And again, we normally, get that directly, but I do know that we have gotten, questions coming directly from the FDA. I can't say that I've seen anything come from any other regulator as it's been raised, but I would say reach out directly to the manufacturer or the labeler that's responsible for the devices to provide some clarity.
That's helpful. Thank you. So just either of you, with all these different types of pitfalls that Lana described here, would you advise the community of the best ways to resolve them? Or is it just take them one by one, resolve the issue at hand of the day?
I probably would take it one by one. Again, sometimes if you throw everything at once, you may not get ultimate resolution. So I think that, as we talk about the date format or whatever, I think for manufacturing, again, I know that was one thing when we had the US rules come out for UDI, that we really had to go take a look at our labeling and looking at the format of the date, and then making sure that we implemented that this needs to change. We need to have the 4-year for the year instead of just the 2-digit for the year. So you have to make sure that you are doing assessment on your products, especially when new regulations are coming out regarding labeling or UDI. As far as like the barcode, and I saw like, that you may not be able to scan it, or the application identifiers, or missing a check digit. Again, we have personally I have not seen that happen in Medtronic. But I would say that, making sure that you have the right tools. So I know that at least from a GS1 standpoint, you have a way of being able to make sure that you have the right check digit in your barcode. But you also want to make sure that you are, and I think from a standards perspective, making sure that you are compliant to the standard of that barcode. Make sure that it is scannable. So you want to make sure that you're doing some type of validation checks before you move that into production. But again,
Yes.
I know the application identifiers, again, there is a requirement, based on some of the UDI regulations for what needs to be in that PI portion of what you could add it onto it. But again, I think making sure that we're trying to communicate as much as possible as far as, all the application identifiers. And I don't think Jay spoke up on this, but again, there is a new identifier that's coming out called the Master UDI that will be applied to contact lenses. So again, there's going to be a little bit different. And I also say that with the barcode itself, I know there's also a requirement as far as having like the UDI symbol to identify which one's going to be the UDI barcode versus one that could be like the link to the EIFU or product information. So I think making sure we have the appropriate symbols that represent what is actually on the label. So you know definitely what's going to be the UDI. But I think the big thing is making sure, like when you're printing out your barcodes, there are standards and specs that you need to meet based on your issuing entity, and you should definitely incorporate that into validations before you move that into production.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So, yeah, just one thing we did talk a lot about, or Jay talked a lot about earlier, were all the different global requirements. And 2026 seems to be a year of a lot of other countries coming on board with UDAMED, Australia, Switzerland, etc. What would you say are the most significant conflicts between the FDA requirements and all the other international regulatory rules that manufacturers have to resolve in order to maintain a single harmonized data strategy?
I would say the biggest thing is the data. So again, I think we're seeing definitely from the European side, there's a lot more data that we have to put into UDAMED in comparison to what we have to put in for Australia, Singapore, and the US. But the biggest one is going to be, I would say, the format of the data and what they're exactly looking for. So like the list of values for clinical sizes don't exactly match between Europe and the US. So it's sometimes from a manufacturer having to transform the data to make sure that we're getting the format for each region. We can't keep necessarily reusing the same data, which adds a little bit of burden and extra step. And then maintaining that data. So now we have to make sure that we maintain it, even though it's the same clinical size, whatever, but if something were to change, we have to make sure that we update it. And making sure that you have those triggers. I know it's going to be probably a little bit more challenging for maybe some of the mid-sized companies and small companies that might be doing this manually. I know from a UDAMED standpoint, it takes probably almost a half hour to enter data in, because there's multiple screens that you have to go through to enter data for one product. But I would say just the consistency, I think, of what the data is, the definitions. There are sometimes slightly different definitions. So from a manufacturer, we have to make sure that we align and make sure and understand what each regulator is wanting. If we need to have two fields, we're making sure this particular field goes to Europe, this one goes to the US. That's going to be the thing that's probably the most challenging. And to get into the database, it's definitely maintaining that data and keeping it updated in a timely manner.
Wow. Okay, spoken like someone who has spent a lot of time looking into this. So yeah,
Yes.
The final question, near and dear to my heart, with some of the advantages of RFID over barcode reading, automatic bulk reading, being able to write to the tag, things like this. Is there a place for RFID tags and RFID systems to aid in this compliance journey?
So I would say, Debbie, is, we do work with both barcode scanning and RFID technologies as data capture tools. I think RFID has some very nice opportunities and some very nice benefits around things like being able to do real-time tracking, real-time location, obviously, continuous process tracking, for instance, chain of custody events capture. Those sorts of things. But when it comes to the direct compliance, as far as the actual data being captured, right, the UDI needs to be on the package anyway, regardless of whether or not it ends up in the RFID tag, right? So because the RFID tag has to be connected to that UDI data
Right.
in one way or another, whether it's through the tag itself or whether it's through a database, right, that connects that information. But so I would say RFID is an excellent tool for, as I said, the tracking, right, and but not necessarily directly involved in UDI compliance per se.
Okay. Yeah.
But one thing you also want to make sure that we also understand is that, when we're scanning that barcode, we want to be able to scan it throughout the entire supply chain. So again, if there are specific type of scanners that are needed, so that's one thing as we're moving from the linear barcode to the 2D, there are different type of scanners that are needed to be able to capture that. So you got to make sure that, it's great if you want to incorporate it, but if it gets to a hospital or somewhere within the supply chain and that person can't scan it, we are losing kind of that benefit. So you want to make sure that we incorporate and make sure that it can be scanned throughout the entire supply chain.
Correct.
And customer, yeah. That's the key
Absolutely.
piece.
That's right. And that goes for RFID as well, right? If the RFID is deployed by the manufacturer, for instance, for a single manufacturer, and you go into the hospital environment that does not have an RFID infrastructure, for instance, well, it might be great for Medtronic to be able to capture their products, but not everyone else's products, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure that would have to be in place for that. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. I think hopefully we'll come to the day when the industry is ready for that. I think it will save a lot of some of these errors or make them easier to correct for sure. All right, well, thank you so much, Lana and Tania. Very much appreciated your great information and experience here. I'll turn it back over to Jay.
Yes, thank you all. Great panel, great discussion. Lots of things to think about. If we can pop to the next slide, there we go. Thank you, and we're thank you, Beth and Karen, for bringing up the end here, and look forward to your conversation. So, Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks for the opportunity. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to push through so that we can make sure to get to Karen, who's going to speak after me. You can go to the next slide, please. So really today, what I want to talk to you about is not just UDI, but this combination or notion of UDI as well as barcode choice, right? So all industries today, both healthcare and others, and even both within the retail and the non-retail environments, really are eager to have more information than ever about the products that they buy, sell, and use. And the need for specific information is growing exponentially. There are very specific examples in healthcare that we could call out. Some have been called out today, around the notion of CMS and different things. So, but like I said, UDI is definitely a part of this answer, but so are the barcodes that we choose to use within our environment. So next slide, please. Barcodes certainly can support a variety of levels of detail at the product and attribute level, and barcode capabilities have evolved since the first scans over 50 years ago to be able to support this. In the beginning, barcodes were very basic, right? They could contain that unique identifier in the form of a G10, and everybody knows this is still, highly common in the retail world. Retail is actually actively moving to 2D barcodes through an effort that GS1 is leading with our next level data carrier strategy. But then fast forward to several years ago, many decades ago, when the recognition that barcodes needed to do maybe more than just have a unique identifier or a G10 encoded, they needed additional information. And this is where UDI and other specific information about the instance of a product was supported with not just the unique identifier, but with application information, application identifiers also being encoded. Today, even more evolution is taking place, and more advanced barcodes are acting to redirect users. We're all familiar with QR codes. They became exceedingly popular during COVID when you'd go to your restaurant and your menu was no longer in in hard form, it was in electronic form. So you'd scan your little QR code on your table and go to the menu and make your choices. QR codes have a place in healthcare to redirect information, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Next slide, please. And there are certain characteristics about these barcodes. Many of you are familiar with this, but it's really about additional characteristics, not just the ability to encode more data, but things like encoding more data in a smaller footprint, which 2D barcodes allow, as well as 2D barcodes being a little more user-friendly in that they have built-in error correction. We've all gone to the grocery store and, your barcode's a little screwed up or the sticker was put on with a wrinkle in it and it doesn't scan. 2D barcodes are much more forgiving, if you will, in addition to being able to hold a lot more data, as well as hold that data in a much smaller footprint. So this too supports that need for more reliability and more data, and the barcode choice is part of that. Next slide, please. Use cases, I could go on for 15 minutes alone in talking about what use cases can be better supported by more advanced data carriers, and in particular, the 2D data matrix. So capturing and storing information, being able to recall all of that information, assists in inventory management and visibility. We've talked a lot today about the ability to capture that information to facilitate recalls. One of the interesting things about the notion of redirecting to web-based information is now you don't need to necessarily change the barcode on a package, whereas before, if anything changed, you were having to go through the actually rather costly expense of changing the actual barcode on a package. Today, you can change that information in the web-based format and have the barcode redirect to the most current and up-to-date information without the cost of having to actually change what's on the package. So that supports sustainability and has become a big driver, quite frankly, for folks who are looking into moving towards this more advanced data carrier. Next slide, please. I wanted to call out today, in the short time that we have, two specific things that I felt like may be important to this community to let you know about and see if you want to get involved, because there are engagement opportunities. But GS1 at a global level has been working with Google over the past year and a half to 2 years to enable native scanning of the GS1 data matrix. You have apps on your phone that can scan GS1 barcodes, but you don't really capture all of the information necessarily. So GS1 Global has, like I said, worked with Google. They have completed a proof of concept exercise to successfully scan the GS1 data matrix right from your phone and direct that information to, like I said, that web-based or web accessible data, as well as get that robust result from a GS1 data matrix. And several MOs, member organizations, including GS1 US, are currently recruiting pilot participants to further prove out this scanning capability. One of the key opportunities that's being explored is the ability to redirect to scan natively a GS1 data matrix and then redirect to electronic product information leaflets and electronic instructions for use for both drugs and devices. So this is a very exciting time for GS1 data matrix barcodes, because this is, I think, going to be a very heavily welcomed capability within industry, not just healthcare, but other industries as well. Next slide, please. The other use case I wanted to point out, while I know we're talking about UDI and in particular a focus on medical device, One of the burning topics right now that GS1US is engaged in is supporting industry with the National Drug Code format changes. Now, I know that NDCs are primarily assigned to drugs, but there are combination products and other things that also have national drug codes. And interestingly, this is not just a healthcare opportunity. I won't use the word problem, but opportunity. This change to the National Drug Code format is actually going to impact almost every industry that we as a not-for-profit standards body serve. So it's very important for us to support industry in this drug code format change. Just to give you a little specifics around that, I grabbed my graphic with the word proposed is still on there. This is no longer proposed. On March 5th of this year, the US FDA finalized their rule and have moved to a 12-digit NDC format. So all NDCs will begin to be transitioned to a 642 format. The impact that this has from a barcoding perspective is that this change to a 6-digit labeler code will no longer allow the NDC to be embedded as a G10. What you'll have to do is move to the use of a new application identifier, AI715, and you will have to encode that actual NDC number now as part of the barcode. What this does is it means that the UPC is no longer going to be an acceptable barcode since it can't encode any AIs. And a linear GS1128 with its character limitations are probably also going to be migrated away from because there just won't be enough character space to encode everything that will be needed. So the GS1 data matrix has become the barcode of choice to support this NDC format change. Next slide, please. What I would invite all of you to do, if there's an interest in either one of these use cases that I've spelled out today, and they are by no means the only two that are in play, but these are the ones that I thought would be of interest to this group today. I've put here the contact information at GS1US for each of these projects, and I would encourage you to reach out to these folks, Tracy Nazarenko or Ulrich Majewski, or you can certainly reach out to me if you have additional questions about either one of these. Now, very quickly, I'd like to turn this over to my friend Karen Fleshman. Karen has a real life example within a healthcare network and a hospital that she'd like to share with you to kind of bring this all home as to the value of UDI and the value of scanning. Karen?
Yes, I've been enjoying the information so much, my video didn't want to come on. All right, well, thank you all for having me. As Beth said, I'm Karen Fleshman, and what I will be doing today in today's webinar is that I wanted to share with you all some of what we're seeing in terms of mid-market medical device manufacturers and just some of the things that we have identified. And so the way that we work is that our customers are presented to us through referrals, where they have been informed that they need to comply with the UDI final rule as a result of a relationship with a co-packer or a relationship with a provider that will let them know that they need to comply. And so invariably what we find is that, there's some form of apprehension, in terms of the reason that they have to comply, as well as, what it's going to take, for them to become compliant, just some reluctancy. And one of the things we find is that, unfortunately, really wanting to do like the minimum necessary to actually comply instead of, looking at it from the benefits that it can provide not only their customers in terms of providers, but it can provide for their company as well. So there's a lot of anxiety with when our clients reach out to us for the first time to help them through this process, through the UDI process. Next slide. So what we do is that we train them, right? We train them on the process, and then after the training, we also like to give them like a case study or use cases to help them understand like why is this important. And one of the cases that we found is what's happening on the provider side as it relates to why it's so important, to mark devices and to have UDIs and to have barcodes on products. And so one of the things that we found as a result of GS1 Global is this use case that basically quantifies why it's important. Next slide. So this particular provider is from the Netherlands. They have been on a long journey, to move to more or less of a paperless environment. And they are also committed to patient safety, like, of course, we all are. But they have their use of barcodes throughout every aspect of their operation is substantial. And so what we do is we walk them through. There's a lot of details behind how they got there, and we walk them through how the whole process works. And again, just going back to, it's not just another regulation. There are actually some benefits that not only, again, medical device manufacturers are realizing, but also providers. Next slide. So one of the challenges, and I know, so this is pharma, but the key thing is, the whole aspect of marking, right? And having barcodes on products. And so in this particular case, they all look alike, right? But they are actually the same product, but with different dosages. And so without the barcode, it would be very difficult for a clinician to differentiate between the three. And so that's another example in terms of what we provide our customers to help them understand. Again, same product, but different dosages. And it's just really important that the barcode can differentiate between these three dosages, if you will. Next slide. Also, from a medical device standpoint, scanning of the products, of the devices, I should say, it helps in the sterilization process. We already kind of talked about inventory management, and then these products are also scanned during point of care. So that's another really key point that we, talk to our clients about when we're doing training and helping them to kind of ease the anxiety of having to implement the UDI final rule. Next slide. So the result of the case study, is just substantial, right? They not only have been able to quantify it from like a patient standpoint and medications being scanned and devices being scanned, they've been able to quantify, this is really substantial, for one facility, is that through the marking of devices and pharma products, that they have identified that 250 cases have actually prevented harm, and that's substantial. And then also this last point here is that they've been able to quantify it from a dollar perspective, and as we know, that's that's a key driver. It's like we do all this work, but in terms of implementing and being more efficient, but how do you quantify it from a cost savings perspective? And this particular provider has actually done that. And I'm sure that there are so many more health providers, hospitals, if you will, clinics that are realizing the same benefits. But again, I wanted to present this to my clients because, it's tangible. Yeah, and so from a cost savings perspective. Next slide. So as a part of this case study, the most profound part of this for me, and that's why I share it so often, is that through being able to scan barcodes, within 1 year, they saved 47 lives. And that's 47 people that could have passed away that didn't, as a result of the work we're doing here with the barcodes and ensuring that not only pharma but also medical devices are being scanned. And so again, very substantial. And then also from a device standpoint, what you have here is systematically being able to remove defective and expired devices, and pharma products out of the supply chain to ensure that they're not being used, at point of care. And so these are just some of the points that I, again, share with my clients. After we presented this as a part of their initial training, it eases the anxiety quite a bit, and they feel like they are being a part of the solution. So that's that's a huge benefit, not only for us and for them as well. Next slide. So thank you all, and I'll turn it back over to Jay.
Thank you, Beth and Karen, for that. That was great summary of everything that we've been working on. We are a couple minutes over, so we have some questions that came in. Some have been answered. We will work on the rest and get them back out to you all. And with that, I want to thank all of our panelists. It was a great session, so thank you very much. And thank you all to the participants who have stayed with us here through this all. And with that, I will say have a great day and thank you and take care. So goodbye, everyone.